In this video, we're going to talk about what you should do to design the perfect training routine for your handstand sessions. What's up everyone, this is Vincent Vis, and today we're going to start talking about the big mistakes that beginners do when they train handstands and how they design their handstand training. And the last thing you want to do when it comes to handstands is to just fluff around and improvise. This is the best way to not make progress. And in this video, we're going to see why and what you should do to ensure that you are practicing the right amount to ensure consistent progress. And trust me, it will make the difference between breaking through plateaus in a matter of days versus stagnating for months onward. Let's start with an analogy with the word of fitness. Even if you've never set foot in a global gym, you have a vague idea of the stereotypical newbie that starts training in January. So they have the best intentions in the world, they just bought that new membership and they rock up to the gym, trying every single machine there is out there, jumping from one exercise to the other, doing a few crunches there, curling a few barbells here, going to the treadmill, but not knowing how fast they should run, paying attention to how much they sweat, but ignoring completely the speed at which they're running, their heart rate, and all the other important variables, stopping when they feel tired without really knowing how long they should have run in the first place, then trying this new fancy machine that the management has purchased, banging a few reps on it, not too sure of the form and the technique that they should have ensured they were performing the drills with, and in the process circumventing the very muscle groups that that machine was supposed to target, and then just finishing the session with a few passive stretches here, heading home with a proud sense of achievement. I like to call this approach to training the tapas method. You don't quite know what you're doing, you're trying a bit of everything, and at the end of the day you call this a diet. However, while there is room for you to try things and have fun, absolutely, with your training, diversity is not synonymous with progress. And the same happens with most handstand beginners. They fluff around, they improvise their training. They are addicted to diversity and novelty. They are unsure of what they should be doing and how much they should be doing it and how exactly they should be performing those drills. They end up giving up too soon, not sticking long enough with those hard drills that however would have yielded the best benefits and the best results. And then they stick with the wrong drills for too long. They also pay attention to the seconds on the timer more so than the shape and the technique and the form with which they're executing the drills, obsessed with how long they can hold a handstand versus how well they can hold a handstand. And then they have this shiny new object syndrome, right? Every time there is a new drill, we jump on it hoping that this will solve our problems and that this will be the key to unlock those elusive handstands. And when you do this, you don't work on your foundations and invariably you end up plateauing. However, when you are a bit more seasoned, and that has more to do with how well you think of your training, either on your own or with a coach, and if you're interested in getting coached, you can head to the description below with more information about the classes and the coaching. When you know what you're doing, you plan your sessions ahead of your training. This is the guarantee that you will not fluff around in your training. You have a clear direction to follow. You know exactly which drills you're going to work on and why, how you should perform them, and how much of it you're going to do. You also know that handstands are a work of frequency, and you know the minimum amount of sessions you will have per week and the ideal amount if you were to have a bit more free time. More importantly, you stick to those high return on investment drills, knowing that they will yield benefits, and you don't compare yourself to your friend or your neighbor because what you may need may be very different from what they need. And back to the foundations, this is gonna sound cliche, but you work on them again and again and again because you know that the more solid they are and the more refined and complex variations of handstands you can then work on. If on the contrary your foundations are a bit fragile, it will bite you in the ass. This is a common mistake many make, including myself. We tend to think that just because we can do a drill most of the time, that we have mastered it, and then we jump to the next progression. And this eventually will put you in a position where your foundations will not have been honed enough, will not have been solid enough for you to be able to execute properly the next progression. And then you will plateau, and the only way to break through that plateau is to come back to that specific drill, that specific foundation, and work on it. And in the process, you're wasting a lot of time and you are going to get frustrated. It is tempting to jump ahead too soon, but trust me, it will end up backfiring on you. And a good way to know what you should be aiming for is that the drill that you're working on should feel easy. Session after session, easy, not doable, for you to know that it's time to move on to the next progression. And even when it's time, you should start your set with those now easier variations before moving on to something a bit more complex. So there are 4 main mistakes I see beginners do when they train handstands on their own. So check them out and ensure that you change your training accordingly. In another video, I will lay out my recommendation for the perfect training routine. But right now, let's make sure that you're not performing the worst training routine that you could do. The one that's gonna make you waste time and not yield much progress. First big mistake, beginners jump from one drill to the other. That's the novelty seeking syndrome. They kind of stick to a drill for 1 or 2 sets and then they get bored. Because yes, some handstand drills are not the funniest. And then they move on. And what happens, obviously, is that you end up practicing a bit of everything, but not much of anything. And that's, again, because you didn't have a clear sense of direction at the beginning of your session. However, handstands require a lot of mindful, clear reps. You want to know exactly what to pay attention to for every single thing you're doing, including those boring, seemingly useless warm-up drills. And then you want to give yourself, your body, and your nervous system the time through repetitions to digest, absorb, understand, and automate those cues. And it's only when everything is automatic, only when you don't have to think about that shoulders being positioned in the right way, and those shoulders flexing the proper way, and your pelvis going where it's supposed to go, and that tilt being the right way, that you know it's time to move on. If it's still a conscious effort and it still happens once in a blue moon, you're not ready. Second mistake I see all the time, beginners chase the float. 90% of the beginners I see in classes rush towards the float. They kick up against the wall, they skip the boring tension drills, and then they chase that elating feeling of floating. And of course, like, floating is the closest thing to being in a handstand. So we tend to think that the more we do of that, and the closer we get to the freestanding handstand. But that's absolutely wrong. I like to think of the handstand as a puzzle, comprised of many different pieces. And floating, what you should be doing to float, is only one piece of that big puzzle. You will only be able to float in your handstand if you have worked on all the other pieces that together form that beautiful puzzle that a handstand is, including the way you kick up, how soft you kick up, the body tension, the different subtle nuances of alignment, your pelvis position, your leg position, the finger pushing patterns, your body awareness, and many other things. Floating is not the one drill that governs them all. Just because you can float doesn't mean you shouldn't work on your kick up. I still have people working with me for years working on how they kick up because there's always something to be improved there. And the better you can do that, the better you can do the other pieces of that puzzle. So what you want to do is work in silos. You can have different training sessions dedicated to different elements of your kick up, trying to make them better week after week, month after month. You don't want to skip any ingredients in that recipe. And if you do that, you will end up with a beautiful, consistent, and resilient handstand. Now, training too little. Frequency is a big problem for beginners. And I see it a lot myself in my own classes, because what people tend to think is that if they attend a 75-minute long class every week with a coach, well, then that should be enough to get a handstand. And that's not true. Handstands are less of a cactus and more so of a needy flower or a needy plant. They need to be watered on a regular basis. It's not about pouring as much water as you can once a week and hoping that the plant's gonna survive. It's about carefully watering it and feeding it on almost a daily basis so that it can grow and thrive. And in that, so you're much better off doing more of it in terms of frequency and less of it in terms of intensity. Again, we will talk in another video more about the perfect routine in my eyes, but right now keep in mind that you're better off having smaller sessions, but more often throughout a week, than one big session in which you go from one drill to the other without quite knowing what you're trying to achieve here. Now, on the other side of the spectrum is training for too long. Beginners tend to train not enough and for too long. Not only that, but they tend also not to rest enough in each training session. Because we're used to other forms of movement practices, We like to feel spent at the end of our training sessions, and we tend to think that if we haven't broken a sweat, then maybe we could have been pushing ourselves more. However, handstands are not fitness. Handstands are a very nuanced, subtle skill, and how wrecked you feel at the end of your session is not going to be conducive to progressing in that skill. You need a lot of bandwidth during your training sessions to assess what works and what doesn't work. Handstands are more of a mindful practice this way. It's not about doing as many sets as you can. Quality beats quantity every single time. So what I want you to do is to treat each set, especially back to the wall, because chest to the wall, it's a bit more tiring, so we tend to actually rest in between sets. But when we kick up back to the wall, we tend to do one after the other until it sticks. And I like to compare this to a gambler rolling a die until they hit a 6. This means that your handstands are always going to rely on luck. You can't keep throwing that die until you hit 6. You have to know exactly what to do so that you can maximize your chances at holding that handstand. If you do not give yourself the time to reflect upon what worked and what didn't work in between your sets, you will not have the headspace required to adjust accordingly and learn from your mistakes. And sheer repetition won't be enough for you to learn handstands. Between each set, and when you kick up, this could be a set of 2 or 3 kick-ups max against the wall. Take a few seconds, 10, 15, 20, even 30 seconds, and ask yourself, did I reach the wall? If so, what helped? If not, why? How soft was I if I reached the wall? What allowed me to be soft, or what made it so that I wasn't soft against the wall? Did I manage to float before I reached the wall? How can I repeat that? What is the one thing I should now bring my attention on for the next rep, for the next set, so that the next set is better than the previous set, and so that at the end of this session, I can remember one thing that I can improve thanks to my own experience through this session for my next training session. That's it, people. I hope this was useful. If this makes sense to you, then try to change the way you approach your own training sessions. You will find more information down below, including a group in which you can post your homework and receive more individual feedback. I wish you all a very good day, and I will see you soon in another video to talk more about the ideal routine I would suggest every beginner to go through.